Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before the Canadian Club in Toronto and said something that cut through decades of policy fog. This is not a transition, it's a rupture. He said this before and he seems to be right. He was talking about trade with the United States, or more accurately, the fading illusion of reliable partnership. For a country long tethered to its southern neighbor, this marked a turning point. The message was clear that Canada can no longer afford to build its future on assumptions that no longer hold. The speech wasn't just budgetary housekeeping. It was an economic manifesto as well, a call to rewrite how Canada thinks about sovereignty, security, and supply chains. A statement that the old reliance, especially in US, defense and procurement markets, has now become a strategic risk. This has been a huge part of the recent Canadian budget as well, and we have a full deep dive into that one, so I strongly encourage you to check that one out if you have some time. It's a long one, but I think it's worth the detail. For this video though, here's what I will take you through: the unraveling of the Canada-US trade interdependence and why 2025 might be remembered as the year Canada outgrew the assumption of alignment; how Carney's budget speech reframes national spending not just in economics, but as a declaration of intent to build Canadian, buy Canadian, and think Canadian; and what this means for ordinary people, workers, students, families, anyone who is trying to make a life in a country that's choosing boldness over comfort. If you're new here, this channel unpacks global policy through the lens of everyday lives. If you've ever felt the consequences of faraway decisions in your paycheck, your commute, or your rent, you're in the right place, and please consider subscribing. Before we dive in, just a quick personal note. I've recently released Awake, a book about how to think clearly when the world turns chaotic. It's for people who still believe in calm minds, honest questions, and staying grounded even as the systems around us shift. If that sounds like you, I've linked both the book and the launch video below. It's also the best way to support this channel. Every copy helps me keep making thoughtful, independent content. Now, let's turn to the speech that may have marked the end of one era for Canada and the start of something entirely its own.
So the point is that, history of nations, certainly the history of Canada, is punctuated by such times when our actions can be decisive. And we're in one now, to be clear. We're in one now. Technological change is accelerating rapidly. The world has become more dangerous and divided. And that decades-long process of an ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States is over. And as a consequence of particularly that last point, many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our vulnerabilities. And this is happening fast. This is not a transition, it's a rupture. And it means that our economic strategy needs to change dramatically and rapidly.
Now, in my view, this passage from Mark Carney is one of the clearest wake-up calls that I've heard in a long time. He begins by acknowledging that the history of nations, the history of Canada, is punctuated by such times when our actions can be decisive. That phrasing, punctuated by such times, implies that this is a hinge moment, a moment where the decisions made now will echo for decades. When he says, we're in one now, technological change is accelerating rapidly, the world has become more dangerous and divided, I think he's underscoring that this isn't merely incremental change, but structural as well. He is right, in my view, to say that the decades-long process of an ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States is over. That's a bold claim. It signals a break with certainty, a recognition that what used to work may no longer work. That resonates with me as an external observer. It feels like Canada is choosing to step off of a known path and into uncharted territory with eyes open. And when Carney adds that many of our former strengths based on our close ties to America have become our vulnerabilities, I think this is the most important sentence here. So often strategy is built on past strengths, but strengths in one era can indeed become risks in the next one. For ordinary people, what that means is this: the jobs, industry, supply chains that once depended on the US may no longer be safe bets. The ripple effects of that vulnerability will touch real lives, factory workers, commodities tied to export manufacturing, regions that have assumed continuity. And finally, he says this is not a transition, but it's a rupture. And in my view, that's the emotional and strategic gut punch here. Transition implies manageable change. Rupture implies breakage, disruption, needing a different map altogether. For everyday citizens, this means the game has changed. The rules might change. The horizon might be different. My hope is that by identifying this rupture, Carney is offering clarity and not just chaos. It's one thing to say we need to adjust. It's another to say we need to rebuild. And rebuilding gives me hope because opportunities often come in the wake of breakdowns. In short, I believe Carney is doing something smart here. He is reframing vulnerability into possibility. He doesn't just pretend that the old order will last, which I think is honest in this case. He gives ordinary people reason to pay attention, but also reason to hope, because if someone realizes that strengths become risks, you can start to lean into new strengths. And new strengths mean new opportunities for people, not just for elites. And from that rupture, Carney moves straight into what he believes must come next, not just a new direction, but a new kind of economic self-reliance. Let's take a listen.
Above all, we will build Canadian. We'll be our own best customer. With our new Buy Canadian policy, when the government spends, we will select Canadian suppliers by default. No more will over 70 cents of every dollar of Canadian military spending go to the United States. This budget takes pragmatic, responsible choices to right-size government while protecting the essential social programs that every Canadian, the programs that give every Canadian a fair chance to get ahead. So that includes childcare, dental care, pharmacy care, the National School Food Program, as well as the health, education and social transfers on which the Deputy Minister of Finance of Ontario and his colleagues across the country rely. We protected it. Did you say thank you? No. Because we could, that was a choice to governors to choose. But this is important. It's important for our schools, for our health care, for our people.
In my view, the line when he says, above all, we will build Canadian, we will be our own best customer with our new Buy Canadian policy resonates as a bold recalibration of national identity in economic terms. It signals a pivot from being primarily a supplier in someone else's system, in this case the US, to becoming the lead customer for one's own economy. I think that's significant because for ordinary people, workers, small businesses, communities, it means the possibility of jobs and contracts staying inland rather than always flowing outward. When the speech states when the government spends, we will select Canadian suppliers by default, I interpret this as more than procurement policy jargon, but rather a statement about sovereignty. It says essentially purchasing decisions will be a tool of national strategy, not just administrative necessity. And the fact that over 70% of every dollar of Canadian military spending has gone to the United States is flagged as unacceptable shows the depth of the shift in my view. This is recognition that reliance on external suppliers, especially from one dominant partner like the US, can become a vulnerability and not just a convenience. I also appreciate the framing of the budget as pragmatic, responsible, while simultaneously protecting essential special programs. In the current global climate with wars, supply chains fragility, economic uncertainty, making sure health, education, childcare, dental care, farm care, and national school food programs are safeguarded, this is the key element. I believe that any economic reset must stay grounded in the well-being of people, not just in strategic posturing. For Canada's sake, if these social programs stay intact while the country shifts its strategy, ordinary Canadians may feel the transition less as a shock and more as an opportunity. Speculatively, however, if Canada follows through, and I really hope it does, I can see it emerging as a model middle power that does not just reflect American hegemony or retreat into isolation, but builds a distinct Canadian economic and strategic ecosystem. By investing in domestic suppliers, prioritizing Canadian industry, and reducing dependency on just one large neighbor, Canada may become more resilient, not just in defense, but in trade, innovation, and infrastructure. This could position it as a more credible global player in its own right, with diversified partnerships and more independent supply chains, and that could bring real benefits to citizens, more high-value manufacturing jobs, stronger communities, better control over key infrastructure, and less exposure to a single-point failures in global supply lines. That said, I think the challenge will be execution, of course. Policies like Buy Canadian sound straightforward, but actually reshaping procurement, industrial capacity, workforce skills, and global linkages takes time, and there are trade-offs. If done well, though, the payoff could be managed for everyday people. And in my view, this speech suggests that the government is at least trying to align strategy with the citizens' prosperity, not just grand strategy for its own sake. And after laying out the policies, Carney shifts tone away from budget and procurement into something more emotional, more historical. He reaches back not just to inspire, but to remind people what the country has already done when it chose to believe in itself.
When the Second World War ended, Canadians united in a mission to build big things. New neighborhoods for hundreds of thousands of returning veterans, new universities to launch new careers, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway, Expo 67, the CN Tower. See, we used to explore in this country. We will chart new courses again. We used to build in this country. We will build big, fast, and bold again. We used to take risks in this country. We will step up to the plate again. We choose Canada. C'est notre pays. C'est votre avenir. Avec le budget, nous reprenons le contrôle pour bâtir un Canada for it's our country, it's your future. We're taking control. Let's do it together. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
I think what Carney is doing here is invoking memory as a form of momentum and strategy and not just nostalgia. By reminding Canadians of Expo 67, the CN Tower, and the vast post-war infrastructure boom, he is drawing a direct line between national ambition and collective capacity. To me, this is about reminding people that big is possible, not just in theory, but in lived history. The line that stands out most to me is, we used to take risks in this country. It hits differently when the world feels unclear. Because taking risk is not necessarily about recklessness, but about believing that reward is worth the stretch. And I think Carney is asking Canadians to believe that again, to step up, to build not just out of need, but out of purpose. To be honest, I find it moving to hear a country framed not just as a market, but as a mission. The idea of choosing Canada, of choosing something bigger than comfort or status quo, feels rare in today's political language. It's optimistic, yes, but it's also demanding. It asks people to imagine themselves as builders, participants, stewards. So here's my question for you. Do you think this kind of nation-building rhetoric can translate into real action today? Can a speech like this still move people to believe, to build, to risk? Do you feel like that? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your take. And before you go, if you're someone who's been thinking about how to make sense of uncertain times, how to think clearly when the world is shifting, I wrote Awake for You. It's a book about learning to recognize the quiet turning points, to build internal steadiness when external signals are loud. I've linked it below if you'd like to explore further. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.